Hello everyone and welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. We've got a few things to discuss today, including a couple more entry-level contract signings, some more injury updates, and some more off-season rumors, this time involving the Calgary Flames, as they've been surprisingly eliminated, and the Buffalo Sabres, who made a huge push for the playoffs this year. I'll get to what I think those two teams could do in the off-season coming up right now. Hello and welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Today we've got a few things to discuss. To start with, I'm going to talk about some more entry-level contract signings that have happened from around the NHL. Let's start with the Chicago Blackhawks, as they have signed one of their recent 2022 draft picks to an entry-level contract. As they have signed 2022 third-round pick Gavin Hayes, who is a left winger, to a 3-year entry-level contract that will have an average annual value of $897,000, and the deal will begin at the start of next season. So for Hayes, he's actually done quite well. He's been playing over in the WHL over the past couple of years. Was a decent enough draft selection from last year's draft. Wasn't an overly high pick in the third round, but still a pretty decent draft selection, and he does seem to have somewhat of an NHL future ahead of him. Hayes has definitely had a really good season in the WHL. I mean, last year had a decent season, putting up 19 goals, 49 points in 65 games, which isn't too bad, but he's definitely been doing a ton better this year, as he has 41 goals and 81 points in 66 games. So definitely far and away a lot better of a season this year for the Chicago Blackhawks prospect in the WHL. So in my eyes, Hayes, who was a third-round pick back in 2022, does look like he has an NHL future. I think in time he should be able to be like a good middle six forward, maybe not an elite level forward, but I think a decent top 9 forward. He's probably going to have to spend another year in juniors, maybe 2 years in juniors, probably another year in the AHL, so definitely still a couple years away from making an NHL appearance, or at least challenging for an NHL roster spot. But I think for the time being, just signing his entry-level contract is good enough, and I think with the season he's had over in the WHL, Gavin Hayes will probably only get better. So good signing for the Chicago Blackhawks to sign one of their good young forward prospects. Over with the Anaheim Ducks, they have signed a recent prospect acquisition, as they signed Judd Caulfield, who was a 2019 fifth-round pick, to a 2-year entry-level contract that will have an average annual value of $838,000. Now, for Caulfield, he was definitely a pretty decent prospect back from 2019. He was actually a draft pick of the Pittsburgh Penguins, and the Penguins actually pretty recently have traded him to the Ducks, at least his signing rates, as it didn't look like he would be willing to sign with the Penguins. So they traded him to Anaheim. He signs with Anaheim, so good to see him sign that. That 2-year contract will begin at the start of next year. So once again, I don't think he'll go straight to the NHL. Probably going to need a year or two in minors after having a pretty long college career. But I think in time, Caulfield could definitely challenge for a roster spot in like their middle six. I think if you look at Caulfield, he looks like a pretty good prospect. He's had some pretty good seasons in the NCAA. Last year put up 11 goals, 20 points in 36 games. This year 10 goals, 19 points in 36 games. So pretty similar stats to each of these last 2 years. But I think in time, I think Caulfield could definitely be like a good, maybe bottom 6 right winger. I'm not sure if he'll ever be a good top 6 winger, but once again, the Ducks don't have a really deep team, so given that fact, he was going to get a lot more opportunity with the Ducks than he would with the Penguins. Maybe in a year or two time he can challenge for a roster spot, but I think he at least has to start in the minors at the start of next season. So definitely good signing to sign Caulfield to his entry-level contract, and hopefully he doesn't take too long to get to the NHL. Next, with the New Jersey Devils, they signed a really recent pick as well, as they have signed 2022 6th-round pick Josh Filmon to a 3-year entry-level contract that will have an average annual value of $870,000, and the deal will begin at the beginning of next season. So for Filmon, hasn't been doing overly bad, playing over in the WHL over the past couple of seasons, done quite well. Filmon seems to be a pretty decent prospect. He's done quite well over in the WHL. He's definitely been putting up points. He had 23 goals and 45 points in 67 games last year. This year, a whole bunch better, putting up 47 goals and 75 points in 64 games. So Filmon's definitely been producing really well over in the WHL. Looks like a solid prospect for the New Jersey Devils. I would expect him to probably make the NHL in a couple of years' time. I mean, he was a 6th-round pick, so it's quite surprising to see a 6th-round pick get signed this early after his draft year, but he was able to get signed. So Filmon probably will have to spend another year or two in the WHL, then maybe a year in the AHL, but I think in 2 to 3, maybe 4 years' time, Filmon should definitely be challenging for a roster spot. So definitely looks like a really good prospect, maybe a pretty good steal at the end of the 6th round for the New Jersey Devils. and hopefully Philmon can continue to develop really well and be a really good, maybe NHLer in the next couple of years. And lastly, with the Montreal Canadiens, they signed a goalie prospect in Jacob Dobes to a 2-year entry-level contract that will have an average annual value of $925,000. For Dobes, he was a 2020 fifth-round pick for the Montreal Canadiens. He's been spending a few years over in the NCAA playing in college. He's done all right. Last year, he actually had a really brilliant season, putting up a .934 save percentage and a 2.25 goals against average in 35 games played. This year hasn't done as good, but still is a pretty decent season, having a .918 save percentage and a 2.31 goals against average in 40 games. So he definitely looks like he can definitely be a really good, maybe backup goalie eventually in the future. He's probably going to need a couple years in the minors, and the Canadiens still have a couple good goalies such as Jake Allen and Sam Montembeault, and they still have Primo in the minors, so they still have a couple of good players, but I would expect the Dobes to maybe challenge for a backup role in the next couple of years. Probably going to play in the AHL over the next few seasons, but maybe in 2 to 3, maybe 4 years' time, I think Dobes could definitely be a good backup goalie for the Canadiens. So good to see all 4 of these guys get signed. I definitely think Hayes has a future in the NHL, and will probably be more impactful than guys like Caulfield and Philmon, and probably Dobes as well. But I definitely think that with all these 3 guys signing their entry-level contracts, they have a shot at making the NHL in the not-too-distant future. So definitely, I think Philmon and Caulfield should be at least bomb 6 forwards. Hayes could definitely be a really good middle 6 forward in a couple of years' time. And Dobes should definitely challenge to be a decent backup for the Montreal Canadiens. So good to see all 4 of these guys get signed, and hopefully they can continue to develop and get into the NHL in the not-too-distant future. Now that's all the signings we want to get to today. Just a quick playoff update. All the 16 teams have now been clinched. We now know the field is going to be set for the playoffs. We now just don't know the order of who's playing who. I'll get to all that in a second, but the Florida Panthers, the New York Islanders, and the Winnipeg Jets have clinched the final 3 spots in the playoff race. Jets are locked into the second wildcard spot. Isles and Panthers are both going to be the wildcard teams, so good to see those 3 teams get back. Jets were able to beat out the Flames and Preds, who have now been eliminated from playoff contention. The Panthers and Islanders making the playoffs means that the Sabres and the Penguins have both been eliminated from playoff contention. So definitely a sad news for the Pens, the Sabres, Flames, and the Predators to be eliminated. But we now have our field 16, so as I record this here in the morning of the final day of the season for most of these NHL teams on Thursday, as it sits right now, the only guaranteed matchup is the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Tampa Bay Lightning, with Toronto hosting Tampa. That's the only matchup we know for certain. The other 3 matchups in the East will be Boston hosting either Florida or the New York Islanders, depending on what happens with the Florida Panthers in today's action. The Carolina Hurricanes or New Jersey Devils. The winner of the Metro Division will be hosting either Florida or New York I, also depending on what happens with the Florida Panthers today, as well as the Carolina Hurricanes and New Jersey Devils. And then whoever doesn't win the Metro Division between Carolina and New Jersey will host the New York Rangers. So definitely going to be some interesting playoff matchups there. Over in the Western Conference, Edmonton and Vegas both have a shot at clinching the Pacific Division today. Whoever does wind up clinching the Pacific Division today will get the Winnipeg Jets in the first round. The one who doesn't will get second in the Pacific. They'll host third in the Pacific, which right now could be Seattle or LA, depending on what happens. The Kings or the Kraken could get the third in the Pacific spot. So whoever does get the third in the Pacific spot will play whoever doesn't win the Pacific, Vegas or Edmonton. Whoever that's finishing that wildcard spot will either go to Colorado or Dallas. That's another thing that can be decided today. The Avalanche and the Stars are both in contention to win the Central Division title. Winner will get whoever doesn't get the third spot in the Pacific, whether it be LA or the Seattle Kraken. And then whoever doesn't win the Central Division will get the Minnesota Wild. So basically, Colorado or Dallas will host Minnesota. Colorado or Dallas will host Seattle or LA. Edmonton or Vegas will host Seattle or LA. And Edmonton or Vegas will host Winnipeg. In the eastern side, Carolina or Jersey will host the Rangers. Carolina or Jersey will host the Islanders or the Panthers. The Bruins will host either the Panthers or the Islanders. And then Toronto will host Tampa. So definitely, we have the field set. This is the last day of the season for most teams, so just trying to figure out who's playing who in the first round. And after today, we'll most likely know everything. There's a slight chance that the Central Division title will have to wait till tomorrow when it's the actual end of the season with the last couple of games of the season, but definitely. So we know who's in, we know who's out. It's just a matter of who's playing who in the playoffs now. So definitely going to be interesting to see who lines up matching up against who. And also on top of that, the Boston Bruins were able to get a win in their most recent game and have now gotten the most points out of any NHL team in a season in NHL history. So the best season ever as of right now is the Boston Bruins. 64 wins right now, 2 more than any other team has ever had in NHL history, 133 points, 1 more point than any other team has ever had in NHL history. So Bruins look like maybe one of the best teams, if not the best team in NHL history, and they're going to continue to try and push to get that Stanley Cup this year. So definitely good to see Boston do fantastic this year, and good to see all these 16 teams clinch. And hopefully for the 16 teams eliminated, they can do some good work in the offseason, try and get back to the playoffs or get to the playoffs in next year's season. So next we go over to the injury update part of the video. We'll start with the Columbus Blue Jackets. They have a few injury updates, as Eric Robinson and Boone Jenner are both day-to-day right now with upper body injuries and are going to be out for the next little while. So it's quite possible with the Jackets playing today and tomorrow as their last 2 games of the season that those two both probably miss the rest of the season. Jenner's a really good top 6 center who's been playing majority of the season with guys like Gaudreau and Laine. Robinson's a decent bottom 6 forward. Definitely doesn't produce very much offensively, but he's definitely a really good depth forward. So definitely not good to lose either of those two guys. They still have a whole bunch of injuries right now on that team. Columbus has definitely been a really injury riddle this year, so not great news to see those two guys go down with the injury. Maybe they get back in time for maybe like a tomorrow's game. Maybe they get back in time for tomorrow's season finale against Buffalo. It's possible, but it would not surprise me at all if both of those two guys are going to be out for the rest of the season now that the Columbus season is about to come to an end. So not great news to see Jenner and Robinson go down. Hopefully they maybe get into game action before the season ends, but it's quite likely that those two are both done for the season and will have to wait to play again until next season. Over with the San Jose Sharks, they've had a few injury updates, as Thomas Hertl has returned from his injury, but Marko Vlasic and Nikita Okhotyuk are both out due to their injuries. Now for Hertl, he was only out for a couple of days due to a upper body injury, and he's returned to game action. Didn't really miss any time, so good to see that Hertl didn't miss too much game action. He's been in the last couple of games, plus he's probably going to be in for this last season finale for the San Jose Sharks. So good to see that Hertl's injury was not over long term and he's back in the game action. As for Vlasic, he's currently dealing with an undisclosed injury, out for an unknown period of time. With today being the last day for the San Jose Sharks of the season, it's quite likely that Vlasic's going to be out for the rest of the year, so not great news. Vlasic to finish out the season injured. Pretty bad, but still. He's played a lot of games this year and definitely helped the Sharks as much as he could, so not great news to see him go down with the injury, most likely finish the season injured, but he should be back for training camp next year. And as for Nikita Okhotyuk, who was acquired in the Timo Meier trade by the Sharks from New Jersey, he suffered a hernia and he's going to be out month to month right now. So not great news. That definitely puts him out for the rest of the season. Probably also puts him out for the AHL's team season as well. Okhotyuk's a decent enough ball pairing defenseman at the NHL level, and he looks like he's a pretty good defender. So hopefully he can be back in time for training camp to challenge for a roster spots next year. I definitely think he should be able to be back before the start of training camp, but there's always a possibility that he could be out for a little bit longer. So hopefully Okhotyuk can return before training camp and do well. It's not great news to see Vlasic go down with the injury. They'll probably keep him out for the rest of the season, but good to see Hertl's injury was not too long term for the Sharks. As for the Detroit Red Wings, they've had a couple of injury updates. Young prospect Marco Kasper, who has been playing over in the SHL this year, was called up. He got into 1 game of NHL action with the Detroit Red Wings, suffered an injury, and is going to miss the rest of the season due to a lower body injury. So he's missed the last couple of games for the Red Wings. He's most likely going to miss today's game due to the lower body injury. And given the fact the Red Wings are not making the playoffs, this is the last day of their season, he's most likely going to miss that. So I definitely think Kasper could definitely challenge for a roster spot next year. Maybe not a guarantee Kasper makes the team next year with the Detroit Red Wings. I think it's a possibility. Kasper's a really good high-level prospect, but if he doesn't, I think he should definitely play in the AHL next year and have a shot at the NHL at some point. So not great news to only see him get into 1 game of NHL action towards the end of the season. I'll hope that he would play a little bit more, but definitely just not great news to see him go down with the injury that kept him out for the rest of the season. As for Ernie and Larkin, they're most likely going to miss the season finale for the Detroit Red Wings, as they are both out right now due to injuries. Ernie's day-to-day with an undisclosed injury, Larkin's day-to-day with upper body injury. So not great news for either player. Larkin and Ernie are both pretty good players for the Red Wings. Larkin's their top line center. Ernie's a decent bottom six forward, so not great news to see both of these guys go down with the injuries. Detroit's season ends today, so even though they're day-to-day and they shouldn't be out for an overly long period of time, they're most likely going to be finish the season injured. So not great news for the Red Wings, and hopefully both of these guys can recover in the not-too-distant future and should be healthy enough for training camp. So not great news to see Larkin, Erne, and Kasper miss the rest of the season due to injuries. And last week, the St. Louis Blues. They got a few guys back from injury in Robert Thomas and Pavel Buchnevich. Buchnevich missed about a week. Thomas missed about a week and a half due to their upper body injuries, and they've returned to game action, so good to see both those two finish out the season. Thomas and Buchnevich are really two of their leaders on that offensive side, so good news to see them both get back into game action and finish the season strong, and hopefully they can continue to lead this team beyond this season and into next year, as today is also going to be their finale of their season. As for the other two injuries, Marco Scandella and Thomas Greiss both suffered lower body injuries and had been ruled out for the rest of the season. So Scandella's and Greiss are only going to miss a handful of games, but given the fact the Blues aren't making the playoffs, they have been ruled out for the season. So not great news. Greiss has been an okay backup. They have Hofer, so able to let Hofer play. So good to see Hofer get some NHL action while Greiss has been injured. Scandella was already injured to start the season, only gone to a handful of games before being injured again, so not great news to see Scandella miss so much time this year due to injury. But with the Blues season coming to an end after today, it just didn't seem necessary to try and push them to continue to play for them right now. So not good news to see Scandella and Greiss end on the injury front for the Blues, and hopefully they can recover well and are back in training camp next year. But it's great news to see Thomas and Buchnevich get back, and hopefully they can help the St. Louis Blues finish their season strongly. So that's all the injury updates I want to get to today. Next, we'll go over to the off-season plans part of the video. Now, once again, we'll go over some more teams who have been eliminated, off-season plans and what they could be trying to do in the off-season. Trying to see what some of these teams who have been eliminated could do before the start of next year to try and improve their team. I definitely think there's going to be a ton of movement for some of these teams. We've already gone over a handful of teams. Today we're going to go over the Buffalo Sabres and the Calgary Flames, two teams who have been recently eliminated. And we'll finish up with the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Nashville Predators in one of my next videos next week. But definitely, for the Sabres and the Flames, both were really, really close to making the playoffs. Both the Flames and Sabres only eliminated a couple days ago with only like a handful of days left in the season, so both lasted extremely long. But the Sabres and the Flames, they're both completely different spectrums. So we'll start with the Sabres, as they were the first of the two eliminated. They had a really good season this year. Now, look at some of their stats. Offensively, they were a phenomenal team. They were top 10 in the power play. I think they were 8th. They had a top 5 offense, which was really, really good. They were 4th in goal scoring. So both offensive sides were really, really extremely good this year. Defensive sides, not all that great. Their stats on the defensive end, they're 9th lowest right now in the goals against department, so they have not done overly well there. They're currently a bottom 5 team in the penalty kill department, so definitely, if they could shore up their goaltending a little bit and their defense, they should be a lot better team next year. So what could they do to improve this team? I mean, they took some amazing steps this year. I was not expecting Buffalo to last this long in a possible playoff race. If they can play their offseason right, I could definitely see the Sabres making the playoffs next year. So definitely, they've taken a lot of steps forward over the past few seasons. And I know the Sabres fans are waiting to get back in the playoffs, having one of the longest playoff droughts right now. But I think they can definitely challenge for a playoff spot next year. So what could they do? Well, if you look at their goaltending, they signed Devin Levi, who is a top NHL prospect. He started basically all the games he could have with the Sabres after signing with them. And he looks like the goalie of the future that the Sabres believe him to be. Now, given how well they played with Levi and how well he played in net, I don't expect him to go to the AHL right away. I would expect him to go straight to the NHL next year and at the very least be a tandem goalie with someone. But I think the big question is, who's he going to play with? Now, Craig Anderson has his contract ending at the end of next year. I don't expect him to return. Anderson's done a really good job being a good stopgap goalie for the Sabres over the past couple of years, but I just think that with all their depth in net, they probably won't bring Anderson back. So with Anderson gone, I see the Sabres going one of 3 ways. The most likely scenario I see is that they try and find a new home for Eric Comrie, who will have 1 year left on his deal before becoming a UFA, and they run with a tandem of Devin Levi and Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, as that would be a decent enough tandem, I think, to possibly push them to be a playoff team next year. Now, if they don't feel that Luukkonen is going to be a good goaltender for them. Another scenario I could see him doing would be trade Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen and keep Eric Comrie to have a Comrie and Levi tandem. Now, I'm not sure if that would be the best option, as I think Luukkonen could still be a good, at least tandem goaltender in the NHL. So definitely don't think it's a guaranteed Luukkonen's mood either. But one other scenario that I could see him do is trade Comrie and Luukkonen and try and bring in a good goaltender to tandem with Devin Levi. There's definitely going to be a lot of good goaltenders most likely on the market this year. You got a guy like John Gibson, you got a guy like Carter Hart, maybe even a guy like Satcher Demko. So there's definitely some good options. So if the Sabres package maybe Pekka Luukkonen in a package to get an upgraded goaltender, I think they could also do that as well. So it will definitely be interesting to see, but I definitely think it's either going to be a Levi Luukkonen tandem, a Levi Comrie tandem, or a Levi with a new goaltender they bring in the offseason. So definitely, I think if they can shore up that goaltending, they should be a much more competitive team next year. As for their defensive end, they still have a solid defensive end. Now, this is a younger defensive end, which would probably explain why they didn't do too well defensively. They have young guys like Owen Power, Rasmus Dahlin, Matthias Samuelsson, who all look like really, really good defenders. You also have a couple guys like Jacob Bryson and Riley Stillman, who are good third pair defensemen. But I do think that a guy like Henry Jokiharju or Ilya Lyubushkin would be expendable. And I would not be surprised if one or both of those guys would be moved and the Sabres try and bring in a top four defenseman. I think they have a really good young core, but I think they could definitely benefit from having like a good top four, more veteran type defenseman. So it would not surprise me at all if they tried and use some of their draft currency or their prospects to try and improve that top four in the offseason. Maybe they try and sign someone in free agency. It would not surprise me at all if they tried that as well. And if they do sign someone in the top four to play with a guy like Samuelsson, Power, Dahlin, I think Jokiharju becomes expendable. So definitely, I think watch out for possibly Jokiharju and Lyubushkin being traded. Another possibility on that third pair could be Ryan Johnson if he signs his entry-level contract with the Sabres, as he's still a college prospect right now. But definitely going to be interesting to see. But I think if the Sabres can get a more veteran-y type top four defenseman and maybe move on from a guy like Jokiharju or Lyubushkin, that defense should definitely be shored up a little bit more better for next year. And finally, on the forward group, they've built a seriously legit young core in that team. You got guys like Cozens, Peterka, Quinn, Thompson. Skinner and Tuck are not young, but they're still really big pieces of that top six. So, in my opinion, maybe they don't sign too many players to help that offense. I mean, that offense was top four this year, so I don't think the offense is really where they need to improve. But I do think there's definitely some ways they could improve. I just think that it would not surprise me if they brought back Calapolzo, who's a pending UFA, who's their captain, who's done really well on the fourth line. So it would not be surprising to me if they brought him back in like a 1 or 2 year deal that's really not too expensive. I would also think that they could maybe move Victor Olofsson. Olofsson's done well this year, but he's going to be entering the final year of his deal, and he's a really good goal scorer. So I do wonder if maybe the Sabres move Olofsson to try and make room for some of their younger players. I do think that it's quite possible that a guy like Isaac Rosen or Yuri Kulich, who were first-round picks from a few of the past seasons, could challenge for roster spots. Kulich and Rosen have done really well in the AHL this year, and both have shown that they're really, really legit NHL future prospects. So if one or both of those guys would make like the top 9 next year, it would not surprise me at all. I would also consider maybe signing 1 or 2 top 9 forwards to help that offense out as well. But definitely, I think maybe move Olofsson, maybe bring back a Pozo, maybe give some more time to some of these younger guys like a Rosen or a Kulich or both, and maybe try and bring in 1 or 2 more top 9 forwards. And I think if they can round out that top 9, that forward group is going to be literally lethal next year. So definitely, I think figure out the goaltending situation, figure out if you're going to move Luukkonen, if you're going to move Comrie, or if you want to move both for a bigger upgrade on the goaltending side with Levi. Definitely try and add a veteran top 4 defenseman to help that young core group, and maybe use Henry Jokiharju as a trade chip, and then also try and improve that forward group, maybe move Olofsson, maybe bring back a Pozo, who's a good captain, and then maybe also sign another 1 or 2 top 9 forwards. And I think if the Sabres can do this, I think with this young team and how much they've improved this year, it will not surprise me at all if the Sabres do a little bit in the offseason and improve some more. I would not be surprised if the Sabres were a playoff team at the start of next season. As for the Calgary Flames, completely different spectrum. Buffalo, great to see them go so far, so close to the playoffs, definitely showing improvement. Calgary, a lot of people thought they would do a ton better than missing the playoffs. After acquiring Mackenzie Weegar and Jonathan Huberdeau in the offseason for Matthew Tkachuk, after signing Nazem Kadri in the offseason, there were a lot of people who thought that this Flames team would be a top 3 in the Pacific. But they wound up missing the playoffs, which is quite surprising. So they're going to have a ton of questions in the offseason. Now, defensively, they haven't been too bad. They were a top 10 team in the goals against department. They were a top 5 team in the PK. So defensively, backstopped by guys like Markstrom and Vladar in net, they've done really well defensively. Offensively, which was their problem this year, they have not done well. They were 21st, I think, in the NHL in goal scoring. They were like 23rd on the power play. So definitely, the offense is where they need the most help. So what could they do in the offseason to try and improve? Well, in their final game of the season against the St. Louis Sharks last night, they started Dustin Wolf, and he looked really good. Now, Wolf seems to be a future NHL starter in the NHL. So my question is, what did they do with Wolf next year? He's already shown that he's a really, really elite level AHL player, and he looks like he could be ready for the NHL. But the problem is the Flames have both Markstrom and Dan Vladar both signed for the next 2 seasons after this year. So what did they do with Wolf? Well, I think it's possible that Wolf goes back to the AHL next year, maybe plays another year in the AHL, and then maybe comes up to the NHL maybe next year. And maybe they trade Vladar, who will only have 1 year left on his contract. Maybe to try and move Markstrom, but for now I think they probably keep Markstrom and Vladar. They just signed Vladar to an extension that'll kick in next year, so in my opinion, that's probably the most likely scenario. There's maybe a slight possibility that they would try and have Wolf as their backup and maybe they would move Vladar. I don't think it's a very likely scenario, but I think it's a possibility, so definitely going to be interesting to see, but I think for the time being, they'll probably run again with the tandem of Markstrom and Vladar next year. As for that defense, that's going to be a really interesting thing to watch for the Flames. The Flames have Rasmus Andersson, who will have 3 years left on his contract, who I think is really the only safe Calgary Flame. If you look at all of these guys, Mackenzie Weegar is going to be starting the first year of an 8-year contract extension, but there was some talk towards the end of the trade deadline that he could be moved with the Flames not doing too well. I wonder if that gets explored in the offseason a little bit more. And then you have guys like Chris Tanev, who's a top 4 defenseman, Noah Hanafin, who's a top pairing defenseman, Nikita Zaitsev, who's a really good third-pair defenseman, got a hat-trick in the season finale for the Calgary Flames. And Oliver Kylington, who has missed the entirety of the season due to injuries, but still a really good, maybe third, second-pair defenseman for the Flames. All 4 of these guys are going to be entering the final year of their deals, so it's definitely going to be interesting to see who the Flames keep and who the Flames trade away. I would definitely think that they would consider at least trading 1 or 2 of those guys. Kylington can play second or third pair minutes, Tanev can play second pair minutes, Hanafin's a really good top pair defenseman. If they can sign some of these guys to extensions, I would think they will probably keep them. But if they can't sign them to extensions, it's quite possible I could see 1 or 2 of them be traded by the Calgary Flames. And if they do move a couple guys, maybe they go out on free agency or trade and try and fill in those roles as well. So definitely, they have a couple of good young prospects like a Poirier or a Kuznetsov who could make the NHL in the next couple of seasons. But I'm not sure if they would make the NHL cut next year. So definitely, I think this Flames defense is going to be something to watch, with guys like Weegar, Hanafin, Tanev, Zadorov, and Kylington, all possible trade options for the Calgary Flames. As for that forward group, the same sort of thing as their defense. Now, they do have a couple of guys signed long-term. Huberdeau's going to be starting the first year of his extension. They still have Kadri locked up long-term. Mangiapane is still signed for a couple of seasons. They got Coronado signed, and he played his first NHL game in the final year of the season for the Flames, so he looks like he could be a good top-9 forward next year for the Calgary Flames. Pelche has definitely shown that he can be a good top-9 forward this year for Calgary, so I would expect him to continue to be a good top-9 forward. You still have guys like a Blake Coleman, so there's definitely still some good players there in Calgary. But I do wonder the futures of guys like Elias Lindholm, Mikael Backlund, and Tyler Toffoli. All of those guys are going to be entering the final year of their deals, and the Flames definitely had some problems offensively this year. So, as much as Backlund's a good leader, I do wonder if he might be moved. He's a really good second, third line center, so I wonder if he gets moved. I don't think it's as likely that Elias Lindholm gets moved. There was some talk around the deadline that he could be moved. But as for Lindholm, I think the Flames definitely do like him. He's a really good top-line center, so unless they can find someone else who can fill that hole in their roster for now, I don't think they'll move Lindholm, and they'll most likely try and work out an extension with him. Toffoli has also been a really good top-6 forward. It will be a really shame to lose him. But given the fact we're going into the final year of his contract, I think there's also a possibility Toffoli does not come back with the Flames either. So if they were to trade a guy like Toffoli and Backlund or maybe Lindholm, maybe they would try and go after another guy in free agency. I could definitely see him have need like a second line center, maybe a couple of top 9 wingers to try and improve this team. So definitely would not surprise me at all if the Flames went out and were busy and active in free agency and maybe also trades towards draft and free agency. As I think this Flames team has a lot of players who are going to be entering the final year of their deal, and with guys like Kylington, Tanev, Hanafin, Zadorov on the back end, and Lindholm, Toffoli, and Backlund on the forward group, this team is going to have a lot of questions going to be answered, and I think it's quite possible we could see a ton of these guys entering the final year of their deal be moved by the deadline. So definitely going to be interesting to see. I would like to know what you think. Which of the Calgary Flames players will be entering the final year of their deal do you think the Calgary Flames could move in the offseason? And what do you think Buffalo needs to do the most to get over the hump finally and make the playoffs next year's season? So definitely going to be interesting to see, but I would like to know what you think the Sabres and Flames could do in the offseason to improve their teams and make the playoffs next year. So that's what I'm going to talk about for today. Remember to like this video and subscribe. I also do a blog, which I'll leave a link to that in the description below. And I can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.